Hi everyone, welcome to this BIOS setting for my um, ASUS TUF Gaming Z690 Plus Wi-Fi D4. Alright, so what you can see here is actually my BIOS screen. First, if you want to reset off, if you're having the similar motherboard that you have, I'm actually using a 12700K Intel CPU and DDR4 of 4266 megahertz, 16 gigabyte dual channel, two sticks. So yeah, if you want, you can load optimize the default and click OK, and you'll be good. And then just to make sure that everything is actually reset, and then go to your main, check, just make sure that your BIOS are actually up to date. If you can see the version here, this is my current build, which is March 10 2023. These are the latest BIOS that's actually been released by ASUS TUF for this specific motherboard. This Z690 TUF Wi-Fi D4 is really good. I would recommend this for everyone, either beginner or a gamer. You can use this. So yeah, this is the latest BIOS update, just to make sure, because if you're not using a 12th gen and if your plan of using a 13th gen, you have to have a most recent BIOS update, before you even install your 13th gen motherboard, just to make sure that everything will run right. So we go for AI tweaker. As you can see here, my CPU speed, actually I maxed it out to 5000. This is the maximum speed of the 12700K. You can see it later on how I set it up. If you can see here, the current frequency is 5000. Temperature, it will change depending on your usage. Alright, currently my room is like 27 28 here in my room right now, so it's kind of warm. But if your room is colder, this is going to be going to improve. I am just using an air cooler, an D15 from by Noctua. It's a dual tower with dual fan that I use. I'm using an NH an NZXT H7 casing. This is quite relatively new and quite spacious and good for ventilation. Right, enough of that. Moving on to the BIOS, AI overclock tuner. For most cases, if you're using a 3200 or 3600 RAM, you can actually just go to XMP1 and you're all good. But on my end, I'm actually using it to an XMP2 because my 4266 is not part of the QVL yet of this ASUS TUF motherboard. So I'm just using the market top rating or specs of the DDR4 RAM that I have, just to make sure that it will run without any problems. Alright, so here we'll put an auto, the adaptive boost technology is enabled, just for it to give you more multi-core frequencies, not to stick on the topmost, not to mostly overheat your CPU, so it will cool down for some non-heavy CPU processing a game or things that you do online and a multitask. Yeah? So always enable that. If you disable it, it will just go to its highest frequency most of the time, and you will consume more power and will just unnecessarily heat up your system, which is will also eventually will lead to a more lower life of your CPU, right? So I'd recommend that one enabled. It doesn't matter anyway if you're using a demanding game, it will automatically speed up. Okay, so adaptive boost, I put it to enabled. There you go. I always enable the remove all limits. The CPU will always clock on its own limits anyway, so enabling it, gives you the remove all limits, but it will keep at 90 degrees centigrade, which is most of the time will not reach it. Like for my system, if you have a good cooler, then you'll be confident enough to just leave this on enabled, because they can also use auto, but you will not really get the maximum frequencies of the time, because the ASUS BIOS setting will just do its own thing, and will not probably keep it on a different setting. But if you want to do your own setting, then just keep it enabled. Things are auto. You can see your frequency here. If you have a 3200, you can see it here. 3600, you can also see it here. If you set it on XMP1, if you have a 3600 kit minus a 4266, as I've said earlier, so you can see 4266 here. I just always keep it current, and all performance cores, I'll put it on all cores, sync all cores, because the default here is auto, but I just don't do that because I want to maximize my CPU. Alright, which is a 12700K, can max out to 5000 megahertz safely. Alright, as what I've said earlier, your BIOS should be updated to the most recent one, because if it's not, this all core ratio limit will really limit you up to 46 or 49 only. You cannot push in up to 50 here. Okay, you can actually put 51 to overclock it, but I'm not in the overclock mode. This is just in the mere fact of maximizing my CPU right now, so I can type in 50 here. There you go. So it's now 50. So specific performance score, we all put it on auto, because it will then follow with syncing all cores, and it will all be 50. So we do not put them anymore there, so it's just on all auto. Right, sync all cores also for the efficient core ratio. I'll just put it 38, because this is the all core ratio limit for the lowest base core of the base core frequencies of this processor. So it can be from 38 to 50, so 3800 megahertz up to the 5000 megahertz on all core, so you can be more efficient, when you need it. Alright, so we'll just keep it all auto. AVX will automatically be on auto on 50. As you can see here, it's syncing all to 50. AVX will be on auto. Your CPU will auto detect that. DRAM timing, so it will just auto detect your cache latency. Minus the 4266 actually has a bit higher of CL rating, so I don't mind, since it's a 4266 anyway, so it will compensate it. Alright, there you go, all auto to just automatically fill in. Since you're in auto mode here, it will fill in its own channel A and channel B for 2 channels. For DGRAM, I always put the CBR to recommended if you're for overclocking, since your CPU is an overclocking CPU, so there's a K in it, so you can overclock it. But if you don't have that 700K in it, then if it's just a 12700 500 non-overclockable CPU, just leave it to auto. But for this one, in this case, we'll leave it to level 4. Right. T-probe, if you have a sensor in your processor, in your motherboard, there's a sensing tip there, you can plug it in the probe, then you can place it anywhere you want to test. But this one will just leave it to T-probe, since I have no sensor attached to it. I would not put it on extreme, since I'm not overclocking at the moment. Right. Power management, we'll just all leave it to auto. That's not our goal right now. Our goal is just to maximize our potential of our Z690 and our 12700K CPU. Right. You can see here the DRAM voltage of my DDR is 1.4, because the 4266 megahertz requires a 1.4 voltage. Unlike the 3200 and 3600, you can only use up to 1.3 volts, down to 1.2 for the 2166, which is the base frequency for most of all the DDR4 RAMs. Yeah, but when you put it to XMP, the XMP mode will automatically decide the voltage for you, so you don't need to mind that and don't need to change that. So next is sorry, we go to advanced mode. Here or enabled, disabled, these are all predetermined for the motherboard default. You don't need to change that. CPU configuration, you can see in the efficient cores, it will just give you the data of what processor you have in the efficient core, which is good. On the performance core information, this is what you have. There you go. So you can just add 4 here, and then you can add 8 here. Okay, so those are the total cores that we actually have. So this is you can see here what's supported and what's not. So, okay, C sets. Okay, here by default this is usually disabled, but I just put it on enabled because I use it for my antivirus. It will actually good for virtualization. It will help you more. Okay, this one we're gonna disable it because we are all syncing it and all auto on its maximum frequencies, maximum for E core, maximum for P core. Okay. This one we're just going to leave it all on auto. Some are disabled. There you go. This is our maximum frequencies. Okay. Speed step, leave it to enabled. You don't really want to overheat your CPU or make it always on high temp. If you don't really need it, it will automatically speed up when you need it, depending on the requirement of your load of your software or games. What you use here, you'll see, and once you save this and use up all your software, you can just see which one is actually going to get the maximum frequency of the CPU, or some you might probably not need the rest of it, so just keep it enabled. Okay, all turbo disabled. This one, the agent, we leave this to enabled. Graphics auto. The graphics, the CPU that I'm using, the GPU that I'm using right now is an MSI RTX 3080. It will just auto detect it, and then we're just going to, since our Intel processor doesn't have an F or any suffix on it, so that means that our processor is actually capable of displaying on its own integrated graphics, or UHD. For this one is an Intel UHD 770 UHD. Yep, but we're going to disable that since we're not going to use the processor's video. So we're just going to disable it to save up more power on the CPU, but we're just going to use our GPU as our primary graphics display. Alright, here put enable PCI Express here, so it's already automatically detected since we put it on auto earlier. For our PCI here, graphics configuration is auto, so you can see it here. It will actually detect itself. It says for M.2, I'm using a Kingston PCIe 4 M.2 SSD and NVMe. So this one is the GPU, which is X16 lanes. This is also a Gen 4 MSI 3080 RTX. Here, configurations, just remain it on auto, so that for whatever you're going to add there, you can see it, and it will just automatically adds to your system. Just all leave it to auto. This one is enabled for PTT for Windows 11 setup. USB, if you have a Thunderbolt, you can enable this. If not, just keep it as a default as disabled. Same here, TPM, they're all like that. We'll just keep it that way. For GPU, mostly you have to enable the 4G decoding to get most of the features of it, and the resize bar support also to enhance some of the gaming modes that requires the resize bar support. But if you're using an LHR, from those days, they're using it for mining now, for LHR hash rate, so you'll not be able to use that here anymore. Alright, SanDisk, okay. disable stop. NVMe, so this is the Kingston that I mentioned earlier. It's a 1 terabyte M.2 SSD. Okay, and this is the support drive for my other downloads. Right. Hard drive, you put more hard drives depending on the capability of the board. The board, I believe, can actually take 4 initially, and then 3 M.2s. Okay, for APM, I always put this on enabled for S4 and S5. Because by default sometimes this is disabled by default, so you can enable it to S4 and S5, just to make sure that all your USBs and ARGBs are actually off when you power off your system. So this will allow BIOS to switch off some power at S4 and S5 to get the system ready for EIP requirement. So when set to enabled, all other PME options will be switched off. So it's totally off or shut down if you're going to go to this option. Alright, RTC PCIe, you don't use that anymore, so it's just disabled. Okay, auto HDLAN, just keep this all like this, especially when you are just about to install or reinstall Windows, just to make sure all the right or necessary software and proprietary softwares and firmwares are actually installed. You can just disable it afterwards if you don't really need it. Like your LAN, if you're using your Wi-Fi, you can just turn it off to save up some power. For LAN, you can also turn it off if you're not using LAN. Better to just concentrate it. Like with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you can disable or enable, but I suggest to keep it that way for more flexibility and connection. Rapid storage, I don't use that, so I don't have it. You cannot see it here. Okay, now we go back to monitor. Yeah, temperature monitor. It's better that you monitor it so you can see whatever is happening. If there's something that is causing some heat or problems later on, you can use it for troubleshooting. For fan speed, of course, it's better for, this motherboard is really, I really love how ASUS actually works with all these sensors here that you can easily see and change the speeds of all your PWM fans. So I have one fan intake for the CPU, since I have a dual tower, and I have another one on the extra side on the second tower of the CPU, cooler of the Noctua NHT15. So chassis fan here, this is for the one at the rear usually, the fan one, because that's the one nearest to the rear part. So this is the exhaust. Fan speed 2 can be your top or your intake, depending on how you orient your PWM pins. With here, I actually use my fan 3 as a chassis fan 3 as a GPU support, so it will directly blow the GPU going up. And then this is the chassis fan 4. This is the intake. I'm using a non-RGB Noctua NFA A12. This one, I have 3 of this one here. Right? Here, voltage monitor, just to make sure that your PSU is well supported, your motherboard is well supported by your PSU, so you can check here if there's something wrong. You can see it right away. So CPU voltage is at normal 1.4, 1.3, somewhere in a 1.4 average, so, or 1.35 average. So for 12 volts here, you can see it's still 12 volts, 5 volts, rated 5, exactly 5 volts. So for the 3.3, we have 3.3, DRAM 1.4 as what it needs to run the system, so we will not have a problem. For the Q fan, you can tune your fan here, but I recommend that you actually auto tune it, whatever fans installed there, so that it will get its PWM. If you have with auto detect, if it's not a non-PWM, it's a 3-pin or a 4-pin, so it will be easy for everyone. Alright, so just auto detect. If you have an AIO pump, it will auto detect it as well. Okay, now for the boot setup, this is always disabled on Windows. That's why I use. For secure boot, always make sure that this is actually on the UEFI, okay, and on the standard for Windows 11, because there are some softwares that actually require this, like the Valorant, for example. It will ask you to use this, right, and some other applications. Okay. For boot configuration, I just normally put this on disabled because the default here is always enabled, so that you can reboot and restart your system as fast. But since system is actually fast already, the way the CPU, the processor, the RAM, and the motherboards and the chipsets are actually all concerned, they're all quite pretty fast already, so I don't need that. I just want to make sure that all are powered up, all chipsets and the board are actually all initialized properly before the system boots up. Alright, so I'm actually on this one, I am more comfortable to disable this one to see whatever's happening in my screen, aside from the the logo of the motherboard that's just on display. It's pretty, but I don't really put it there, just for me to see what is happening when the computer is booting up. I can see all my my loading of the BIOS and the processor. The right loadings are actually there during startup, right? So post report, I don't change it. You normally just put it in 5 seconds. For this motherboard, some are actually 9, some are 3. It depends on the build, so I don't change that. Numlock, it's always on. Before, it's actually usually goes to off, but now it's on, which is better. Okay, setup mode, I always put this in setup mode as an advanced. I don't really use it as the easy mode, as it will just give you more on the mouse use rather than the keyboard use when you are setting up your system. But it's okay. For an advanced user, you can always go here, but for non-advanced, you can always use your mouse, as the mouse is now can be used in BIOS, unlike the older days. Alright, here just keep it, not unless you have another boot recovery drive, you can do so. Okay, here if you're going to update your BIOS, as was I mentioned earlier, you can always update this, so that in the near future, if you're going to swap out your processor to a higher gen, like for 13th gen for example, which the Z690 TUF motherboards actually still supports. I prefer still the D4. DDR5 is still quite expensive nowadays, but I know they're already going down because there's not much market on that one nowadays, not unless you're really into the overclocking or the high benchmarking rig. Yep. But for me, I would rather stick for my DDR4 because I still have lots of DDR4 sticks lying around here. Not much of the DDR5. Not until they phase it all out. Then that's the time that I'll move on to this to continue with the DDR5. Yep. So you see the current version for as of today. This is a 2305, dated March 10 of 2023. It's still updated. Alright, so once you update, make sure that your model is the same based on the one that you're updating. Alright, exit. I'm gonna exit this. Alright. See here, there's an animator. I don't really use that. Maybe some fancy stuff you can. If you have some customizations, that's fine. User profile, I always get a user profile to save to one on an external drive, so that if ever your motherboard gets RMA'd, or if you're reconfigure or changing your CMOS, actually your CMOS battery, you can always reload your profile from that USB. Just make sure not to lose it, for you not to go to all over this all over again, right? SPD is a serial presence detect of your DD-RAM, your DDR4. I'm using a 2 sticks only for dual channel. I'd recommend to always just use those 2 rather than fill up all the 4, because for better channeling. This DDR4 has an array of XMP 1. Not all DDR actually has this DDR4 XMP2. but since I'm using a G.Skill, it only usually goes up to XMP1 after this JDEC. Right, the XMP2 usually is shown in some Kingston RAMs, but they have lower speeds, but they have also have lower class latencies. You know, faster responses but lower speeds. For Armory Crate, I just enabled this one, since it's okay. You can always disable it or cancel it after Windows setup. Right, because it usually takes time. Right, this one downloads on ASUS, it's up to you, but I always put it on disabled. We don't really need it. We need it afterwards. So we can just go to the website and just download it and install it yourself. Alright, so once you're done, you can just save and then reset. Alright, so that will go to Windows. Right, that's all, folks. I hope you'll enjoy this. You can use this, and that I have helped out everyone on this. Thank you. Have a good day.